Welcome back and thanks for staying with eNCA. Now, Africa's climate change challenges and energy crisis are expected to dominate the upcoming climate summit in Egypt. The continent is facing worsening economic conditions and consequences of the climate crisis, including deadly floods and droughts. Millions of Africans are without electricity and the high cost of living continues to skyrocket. So let's talk more about the upcoming summit and how it should tackle these burning climate issues we are facing as a continent. I'm joined by Dhesigen Naidoo, the Senior Research Associate at the Institute for Security Studies. He's also a climate adaptation lead to South African Presidential Climate Commission. Thank you very much, Mr. Naidoo, for your time here on eNCA. First of all, I assume that some of the most important things that will be topping the agenda at COP27 is the discussion around Russia, their energy sources, which was gas, that saw some European countries, for instance, having been forced to go back to using coal, for instance.
Absolutely, and good afternoon to you and all of your viewers, and thank you for the time to be able to talk to you. Look, we are looking at this optimistically as the Africa COP. It's been quite a while since we had one of these big meetings on the African continent, and we are looking for a bit of a special deal for Africa and countries like South Africa, and I'll talk to that in a bit. But yes, you are right. The energy crisis in the world is dominating the agenda, and it goes both ways. One is that there's a genuine fear that we might drift back into the fossil fuel domain for energy security in developed countries. But it's also possible, and we're hoping, that people will realize that the high carbon economy can't guarantee the energy security that we need going into the future in order for us to stop being energy poor, as we are in South Africa right now. We need to make this very big switch to renewables for sustainability.
All right. So what is it exactly that you're hoping will be discussed, particularly for Africa? I mean, we've had those deadly floods in Nigeria. We've had deadly floods here in South Africa in terms of KZN. And it looks like, natural disasters are becoming more and more of a problem in an African continent where that never used to really happen.
Indeed, look, the big banner for this Africa COP is, in fact, climate finance. So climate finance to help with our mitigation efforts. And you know that South Africa has this interesting formula called the JETP, the Just Energy Transition Partnership between northern countries and ourselves around putting us on a pathway to renewable energy. But the second part is that we are very firmly inside a heated Earth. Global warming is a reality today, and all the impacts that you're talking about are real. So we're looking for a good deal for adaptation financing and to deal with loss and damage so that we can manage in this now changed world.
Do we have the ability, you think, Mr. Naidoo, as the African continent, to be able to lure investors to assist us with funding for climate change? Because, I mean, every time you look at the news, there's bad news about African leaders. So I'm wondering if we have the capacity and ability to lure investors in this instance.
Oh, absolutely we do. And there are many reasons for saying this. One of those reasons is that the world as a whole cannot afford for Africa to have a development pathway that's similar to the development pathway of North America or Europe or Japan. Because if we move in that direction, using the huge fossil fuel asset we have on the continent, which is now about $10 trillion worth, we will be increasing the emissions to a level where life on Earth would actually become very, very difficult indeed. So the world needs for us to have a better pathway. But in addition to that, we have seen great movements on the African continent. You know, in addition to what's happening in South Africa, we've got a green hydrogen hub in Namibia. We've got one of the biggest solar fields on the planet in Morocco, and now a new one starting in Egypt. There's massive new wind farms around Lake Turkana in Kenya. Africa is making the case that it has the ability to do a massive energy switch to a low-carbon future if the other folk come in with us. The last part is that this JETP deal, which is going to be, I think, rapidly replicated by many other countries in the global south, in the developing world, we're now working out those formulae around bringing in sustainable investment in this regard.
And Mr. Naidoo, I mean, I don't want to only talk about the African continent as if we're the only ones who've been seeing trouble. For instance, in England, we saw that their currency also took quite a knock in the last few weeks, but also there were those wildfires across California, parts of Greece, etc. So we're not really the only people. But I want to get your comment on what Minister Gwede Mantashe has been saying about the fact that he feels as though Africa is being forced to get rid of coal. Coal, which is something that has been a lifeline rather for people's livelihoods in the African continent. And he's saying that we shouldn't agree to moving completely away from coal because that is, it's business for quite a lot of people and employment for others. What do you think of that and him saying maybe we should start considering nuclear?
Well, there are a few factors around that are very important. The first of those factors is that going completely away from fossil fuels as a whole is not going to be easy in the short term. It simply is not. I think we're going to get past the coal era, and there's a just transition framework that South Africa has developed, which will work well in South Africa. It will also be a very good formula for other places in the world to follow in a similar strain. But we also have the issues of oil and gas that we have to deal with much more robustly. But it has to become a diminishing part of the mix as we go forward. I mean, as a country, we've already pegged ourselves to be net zero from 2050, which means we'll have a very lower use of fossil fuel energy inside the system. But there's another factor that we shouldn't lose sight of. Because as the world makes this transition to a low carbon economy, it's going to rapidly change all of the trade rules in the world and push for a global Green Deal, which means those countries that produce goods, even high quality goods, but with a high emission status, they won't be able to sell those into the global market. So there's a very genuine downgrade of your economy if you don't make this transition towards cleaner fuels. This is just a grim reality. And people are coming to grips with this. Even the African Consolidated Free Trade Agreement Secretariat is now considering these around their new rules base for intra-Africa trade just on the continent itself. So that we have to get into a low-carbon world is unquestionable. The thing we have to take from Minister Mantashe's comments is that we must do it with logic, and we must minimize the collateral damage that is possible if we move too radically in that direction without taking care of the current people who develop a strong dependency on those value chains.